everybody. Old guy here. Now, this is the first Dennis Lehane that I have ever read. And yeah, I've seen Mystic River, which was a great movie, and Gone Girl, also a great movie, but you can't judge a book by its movie. So, since there are no movies on this one, although rumors of one having been started a decade or so ago, I could just go right into Lehane as a writer, see what he's about. And I got to tell you, this guy can write. So what is this book about? Well, two cities, Tulsa and Boston, are linked by Babe Ruth. Now, how's that? Boston, yeah, we understand. You got the Red Sox and the infamous trade to the Yankees, but Tulsa? Well, that's due to a Negro League pickup game that Ruth crashes in Columbus, Ohio. Babe Ruth is bored out of his mind while the train he's riding to the World Series in Chicago makes repairs in the Columbus yard. And he hears the sounds of baseball and follows it and walks into the game and asks to play. Think of that. The best baseball player in America walks into your local game and says, "Hey, got a spot for me?" Of course you let him. When else are you going to get the chance to prove that black players are as good, if not better, than the racist majors that exclude them? And that's where Ruth meets Luther Lawrence, who is the fastest base runner Ruth has ever seen. And that's where Ruth and a few of his Red Sox and Angels compadres cheat to win the game. Something that affects Ruth profoundly when Luther shows up at a game in Boston sometime later. Because it's Luther who connects to Tulsa, where he is shotgun married, settles into family life in the Greenwood section of town called the Black Wall Street, and manages to screw things up so badly that he's on the run in Boston when he sees Ruth again. And if you know your history, you know that there's some pretty terrible things coming up in Tulsa. But we're not doing that story. We're doing a completely different story that's just as terrible in a lot of ways. Now, all this happening gives you some inkling of the fast-paced, whirlwind blending of events and personalities that drives this novel all over the country, from Ohio and Oklahoma through Boston, and drives several persons into a collision course at the 1919 Boston police strike, which is presented here in all its brutality and unfairness, as is the racism and the contempt for the working man. After all, this is post-World War I America, which has just won its First World War and is flexing its muscles, unaware that it has just released the Kraken. The old aristocratic and class-based order where you working men doff your hats to your betters is lying on a field in France, but no one knows it yet. That's going to take another 20 years of labor riots, anarchist attacks, and the Red Terror before the average person, whose life was stolen from him by the Industrial Revolution in the 1880s, gets his dignity back. The main family here are the Coughlins, a 3-generation family of police or police-related. At this point, you have Thomas, who is a police captain, his son Danny, who is a beat cop intent on a Detective Gold Shield, and their son Connor, who is about to take a position in the Boston prosecutor's office. There's a younger son named Joe, and he becomes a problem later on. They are a prosperous family, upper middle class primarily through the graft Thomas has accepted over the years, and he rules with an iron Irish Catholic hand that brooks not even the slightest deviation from his ever-expanding list of acceptable behaviors. Luther is hired as a house servant, and he and Danny form a friendship around Nora, a more or less adopted daughter who Danny and Luther both love, in their own way. It is these three, Danny and Nora and Luther, who form the eye of the hurricane as the events spiral out of control, from dozens of anarchist bombings to the molasses flood, to the police strike, which breaks everyone and everything. This was not a good time in America. It simply wasn't. And for a while, it looked like we were going to have our own Bolshevik revolution, primarily because of the stubborn and willful blindness of people like Thomas Coughlin, who people like Danny stood against. If you harbor any notion that these were better times than now, this novel should help dispel that. Because that industrial revolution of which we are all fond of and sing praises wasn't all progress and modernization. If anything, it became a medieval throwback, with factory bosses taking the place of plantation foremen and the factory owners becoming the new earls and dukes. You peasants get to work. Leave your fields and artisan shops and stand on a factory floor and get paid in wages, not for your own handmade products, but for your labor. No wonder the communists made such inroads. No wonder unions sprang up. I mean, just 40 years before, the U.S. had fought a war to end slavery, and the factory owners were trying to bring it back. Now I gotta tell you, Lehane can write. And there are turns of phrase and description in here that satisfies even the most jaded literary heart. I couldn't put this one down, just couldn't. It turned out to be, in fact, one of those books that I kept delaying the finish because I just didn't want to stop reading it. Now this bodes well for any other Lehane I might encounter, including what appear to be 2 more novels about the Coughlins that focus on Joe. Of course, I've got some nits, my biggest one being a rather fortuitously timed event in the middle of the book that seems to come out of nowhere, and one that has a rather deleterious and devastating effect on Nora. There is a very reasonable explanation for it a little bit later on, but it still seems a bit contrived. I guess because I didn't want something like that to happen. But in the end, it turned out to be a good thing. Not in its effects, mind you. This is not a happy ending book, but where it leads. Besides Babe Ruth, there's other early 20th century notables here and there, from W.E.B. Du Bois to Calvin Coolidge, and most of them not that admirable. Most of them. Guy here. See you later.